for your presentation this morning. Thanks, Jan. We're delighted to have another fantastic speaker who's making her way up to the stage now. We have Jane Tiller from Australia, who will be speaking about genetic discrimination, the Australian moratorium, and the A GLIIMMER project. Jane holds a double bachelor's degree in law and science with a focus on genetics from Monash University and a master's of genetic counselling from the University of Melbourne. She is a lawyer and a genetic counsellor, have some water, with a background in corporate law and has a keen interest in the regulatory and ethical aspects of genomics. Her unique combination of skills and expertise have enabled her to forge a new and innovative path in translational research and consumer impact. She's considered a national leader on and regularly consulted about socio-ethical issues relevant to genomics and public health. She co-founded the Australian Genetic Non-Discrimination Working Group, and her efforts have directly helped achieve a moratorium on use of genetic test results in life insurance, which is a meaningful policy change now having impact for patients, health professionals, and the public, and no doubt we'll be hearing about that moratorium in a moment. She currently undertakes a number of diverse roles, including the ethical, legal, and social advisor in public health genomics at Monash University, and a senior project coordinator with Australian Genomics. She leads a research project funded by the Australian Government Medical Research Futures Fund, monitoring the effectiveness of the genetics and life insurance moratorium, and is undertaking the final year of her PhD. So best of luck with the final stage in that journey, in that marathon. Jane, delighted to have you with us. Please, over to you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me here. Apologies to anyone whose program is wrong and they were hoping to see our friend Aisling here. She was unfortunately unable to make it, and so we'll kind of go from Jan giving us a great overview of the observatory and the international work that's being done in this space, and I'm going to give you a deep dive into one case study, which is the Australian situation with genetic discrimination and some of the research we've been doing. So I'll run you through the legal landscape in Australia, the history of the problem in Australia, and then the moratorium that's been achieved over time and the research that we've been doing into its effectiveness. There are some unpublished findings, and so where our findings are unpublished, I've just got this little sign on the slide, so please, if you could not share any photos of unpublished findings, that would be great. So in Australia, it's legal for life insurance companies to ask for and use genetic test results that are known to applicants and use them in underwriting decisions. This doesn't apply in Australia to health insurance, and I'll explain why in a moment, but fortunately for us, health insurance is not a problem. Life insurance is the area in which we see this and which we're working on the issues. Just some basics in case you're not familiar with this area. And to explain why there are some differences in the way things work in Australia, there are two types of ways that insurance can be granted. The first way is that insurance is community rated, and that means that premiums are not adjusted based on individual risk. And so this is how health insurance works in Australia. It doesn't mean that there's a special protection against genetic discrimination, but health insurers in Australia can't discriminate on the basis of your smoking or your family history or any other risk factors. Everybody gets the same policy at the same price on an age-rated basis, of course. And in Australia, the other type of insurance is mutually rated insurance, and this means that risk factors can be taken into account and different people can be offered different premiums based on the type of risk that they are seen as bringing to the insurance company. This is how life insurance works, and life insurance includes death cover, permanent disability, income protection, and also travel insurance, which we won't talk about today, but it's always useful to remember that travel insurance is another type of mutually rated insurance. In Australia, we also have something called group insurance, which covers a specific group of people, and we have something called superannuation in Australia, which for the Americans is kind of like the 401k, but an employer provides a certain amount of money per pay cycle into a retirement fund, which you can access when you retire. And these companies can offer small amounts of insurance, and it's a way that people can obtain life insurance at a low level without having to sometimes give medical information or be discriminated against on that mutually rated basis. The legal basics of how it works in Australia is we do have a Disability Discrimination Act, and the definition of disability has been amended to include a person's genetic markers. It's not how it's written, but basically genetic status that might lead to disability is included under the definition. And so discrimination is prohibited under the Act. But there is a special exemption that allows insurers to use genetic information to discriminate. There's a requirement that they must justify this, so it's supposed to be evidence-based, but this section does exist, and so, for example, employment insurance in Australia, employment discrimination in Australia would be covered by this section of the Disability Discrimination Act. This is something that I thought might be interesting to some people who work on this issue in other countries. There's a duty of disclosure that has always existed under our Insurance Contract Act, which requires that every matter which the applicant knows or should be expected to know is relevant to the insurer decision has to be told to the insurer. And so often clinicians will tell people, even if they don't ask about genetic results, you really have to tell them because you have an ultimate duty of disclosure and you have to tell them about everything that you might think they might want to know. Now, there's been a lot of reviews of the financial services industry in Australia in the last few years and a lot of recommendations for reform. And one of these changes that's come in is that duty of disclosure has been removed for consumer contracts and replaced with a duty not to misrepresent. So this means that they need to take reasonable care not to make a misrepresentation to the insurer. So the difference is that previously the onus was really on an applicant to disclose anything that might be relevant, whereas now the onus is on the insurer to ask specific and precise questions, which is quite a helpful change for us. It doesn't take away discrimination, but it does mean that insurers are only allowed to have information when they specifically ask for it. As I said, there is a requirement to be evidence-based when they're making decisions, and there is a requirement to take into account risk-reducing measures. So somebody who's, for example, has a BRCA variant and has removed their breasts and ovaries and has really a very reduced risk of cancer, it is legally required that that be taken into account by the insurer. However, there's very little government oversight, and the insurance industry sets and self-regulates its own policy. And so if something does happen that shouldn't happen under the law, it's very difficult for people to get recourse or to appeal that beyond an internal review. There are some ways, and I'll show you a case study in a moment, of how complicated that can be. There have been documented cases of genetic discrimination in Australia over the years, and we do see that financial concerns deter uptake of both predictive testing and also involvement in research, which becomes very concerning for clinicians and researchers in genomic medicine. I'm going to take you through this poster which I actually presented a few years ago, and just some of the elements of achieving the moratorium in Australia and some of the history of what happened. So in 2001, very long time ago, the UK put into place its now called the Code on Genetic Testing and Insurance, but at the time it was called the UK Moratorium. And at the same time in Australia, there was a lot of work being done around early concerns around genetic discrimination. And some of my colleagues published a number of papers. There was a project around this. And in the same period, the Australian Law Reform Commission undertook a review, very comprehensive review and very proactive at the time, around the protection of human genetic information. They produced a report in 2003 and made a number of recommendations in Australia around regulating the use of information. Many of them were made towards the insurance industry rather than the government. We like to allow self-regulation in Australia, but many of the recommendations weren't followed. And so many years later, we're still dealing with some of the fact that these things that were recommended back in 2003 haven't been put into place. In 2006, there was a Human Genetics Advisory Committee established in Australia. It was supposed to implement a number of these recommendations and monitor this situation. However, I understand from colleagues who were on the committee at the time, it was a really difficult task. They weren't really given very much power to make any changes or to implement these, and unfortunately that was disbanded in 2015. So this is just a case study which was published, and it's almost 10 years old now, but it really shows some of the things that were happening at the time which were trying to be prevented in terms of people having difficulty getting insurance and having difficulty getting recourse against insurers who didn't seem to be doing the right thing. This gentleman went by the pseudonym of James, and when his mother was 50, she was diagnosed with uterine cancer. He successfully obtained insurance, he disclosed the cancer, but he went to his doctor and they queried that perhaps this cancer was caused by Lynch syndrome. Many of you may know this is a genetic predisposition, genetic variants that cause a predisposition to uterine cancer and also to colon cancer. His doctor advised him, which often happens in Australia, to consider his insurance situation before he had the test, and so he went back to his insurer and increased the level of his cover just in case. There were no conditions placed on the cover, it was all fine. However, he then went to see a genetic counsellor to start the process of having testing. The genetic counsellor recorded the appointment in a letter, and he felt that perhaps that was something he was supposed to disclose to the insurer. He told them, and because of this, they retrospectively denied the cover that they had provided him with at that increased level. He went away and had a genetic test and was found to have a Lynch syndrome mutation. And after that, he went to a second insurer to see if he was able to get some increased cover. He was denied cover by the second insurer. He then put together a summary of his surveillance plan, which involved yearly colonoscopy and other checks, and he made the case that he was therefore at population risk. Now, he was quite intelligent and well-resourced, and he pulled together some literature that demonstrated that by undergoing the surveillance, he shouldn't be at an increased risk and he shouldn't be having this kind of discrimination. He sent that to a third insurer, but he was again denied cover. He then went to the Human Rights Commission, which is the mechanism for trying to complain about discrimination, and he put together the complaint with all of the evidence and the literature that he'd found and a copy of letters from his doctors, etc. He then sent all of that information and the complaint back to the third insurer and was then able to obtain cover with a small exclusion. Now, sometimes this was pointed to by insurers as a great outcome, that he was able to get the cover that he needed, but you can see there how difficult it was, how many paths he had to go through, even for something that was illegal within the laws that were in place, and how many resources and information he had to have in order to get that outcome. And so we're going along in Australia and we're not seeing much happening. In 2016, I think late 2015, the Genetic Non-Discrimination Act bill was introduced in Canada, which was eventually passed. And at the time, I had moved from my legal career into genetic counselling and into the genetic space, and we became really concerned about how this was affecting the clinical and research space in Australia. We started the Genetic Non-Discrimination Working Group, which included a number of people from around Australia who were working in this space and interested in the use of genetic information and the concerns around genetic discrimination. At the same time, there was a parliamentary inquiry into the life insurance industry going on, and it was a really good opportunity for us to raise some of these issues. It wasn't part of the initial terms of reference, but we went to them and made some submissions and said, you should be concerned about the way that insurers are using genetic information. We went and gave evidence to the inquiry, and we asked them for long-term regulation on this issue in Australia and also for a short-term moratorium. And we spoke to the committee about the moratorium that was in place in the UK, and we said that this was a good short-term solution while they figured out the best way to regulate this in the long term. Around the same time, we published a number of papers and we worked with some disease support groups and genetic support groups to gather some more evidence of genetic discrimination that was still ongoing in Australia, and some case studies around issues that were still happening. In 2018, the parliamentary inquiry came back. They had a whole chapter on this issue, were quite concerned about the fact that it was still ongoing, and recommended that there was an urgent ban put in place on the use of genetic test results in life insurance in Australia. They recommended that the model in the UK be followed and that that be implemented as soon as possible. The government didn't respond to the recommendations, and in fact, Australian government still hasn't responded to those recommendations. But in November of 2018, the industry announced a self-regulated moratorium on using genetic test results. So that came into place in July 2019, so it's been in place for a few years now. And although it was great that something had happened and that a step had been taken, we still had a number of concerns about the scope of that moratorium and some of its terms. And the main concerns we have, and I'll take you through it in a moment, but there's no government involvement in that. So unlike the UK moratorium, there's no agreement with government, and there was no change to the law. So it's still completely legal without limits for insurers to use this information. It's only their internal policy, which is self-regulated, that has changed, and there are no enforcement mechanisms still to make sure that insurers are doing that. The limits are also quite low, and I'll show you what those limits are. And it's also temporary. So at the moment, it's due to end at the end of 2024. And it's being reviewed at the moment, apparently, but we don't know. There's no certainty around what will happen, whether it will change or whether it will continue on after that time. At the time, we were consulted and we were given a draft of the moratorium as they intended to put it into place, and our group raised a number of concerns. And I actually have a poster which will be out there about how the moratorium matches up to the recommendations that were made. But this just shows there are a few points at which they did respond to our concerns and address some of the issues that had been raised. But on a number of fronts, a lot of those issues weren't resolved in the final moratorium, and there are still a number of ways in which it falls short of the recommendations and of the UK moratorium and the consumer protection that it offers. This is the fact sheet that the industry group put out to explain the moratorium that they put into place. So the financial limits of the moratorium are the amount of policy that you can apply for up until which you don't have to give the insurer any genetic test results. And so these are in Australian dollars. To give you a bit of an idea, I think 500,000 Australian dollars is about 350,000 euros at the moment. So if you're applying up to that level of life cover, you don't have to give any genetic test results. Over that amount, you do have to give all of your genetic test results, and that includes anything. So a clinical result, a research result, something that you got from a direct-to-consumer company from China technically would fall within their definition. It's not required that they be clinically validated or done in an Australian laboratory. And also, we also often talk about the level of life cover that can be taken out, but the amount of income protection is also something to think about. So it's $4,000, which is $48,000, so maybe just over 30,000 euros a year in income protection, which is less than the minimum wage, I think. And to give you an idea of those amounts, $500,000 in Australia is about half of the average median house price. So at the moment in Australia, house median price is over $1 million, and the average mortgage is now over $600,000. So the limits of what can be applied for in life insurance is not even as much as the average mortgage. Over the amounts, people have to disclose any genetic test results, but also medical history can be taken. So there are no limits on taking family history, but only for first-degree relatives. And so in some countries, I know that many more results than that for family members can be collected, but in Australia, it's only family history for first-degree relatives that have to be given. So people don't have to take a genetic test in Australia. An insurer can't require you to take a test. It's only a test that you choose to take that has to be given over those limits. And also, genetic test results of relatives don't have to be given. So only your personal results have to be given, but your family members' diagnosed conditions have to be provided. This is just a comparison of some aspects of the UK code and the Australian moratorium. So in Australia, like I said, our limit is $500,000. The limit in the UK, above which some results have to be given, is £500,000, which is closer to $1 million. So it's about half. And in the UK, the only genetic test result that has to be disclosed above that limit is the Huntington's disease predictive test, whereas in Australia, once you hit that limit, all genetic tests have to be given. So it really is a significantly less consumer protection in Australia than it is in the UK. There's also an agreement between the UK government and the industry in the UK, and there's no agreement in Australia. And research results are also excluded in the UK. And so many of the big research studies that are done in the UK, people are told, even for Huntington's, which is the only one that's an issue, they don't need to do that until it's a clinical test. Because we had these concerns, we applied for some funding and were funded for 3 years to monitor the implementation of this policy and the effectiveness of this moratorium. We started about 2 years ago and we have a year left. And at the end of this research study, we will produce a stakeholder report that will be provided to stakeholders and government and will also contain recommendations around what's happening in Australia and what the way forward might be. We had 4 different streams with genetic health professionals, patients and consumers, genetic researchers, and the industry and financial professionals. We have already published the study protocol, and we've also published the first of the results papers with health professionals, and so all of these results are published, but the results that will come next are not published. With our health professionals, we did an online survey, and it was open to qualified health professionals who were working in an Australian service and discussed genetic testing with patients. We had 166 professionals fill in this survey, and just the box there shows you what we're talking about when we say genetics professionals. So it was open to people who didn't work in a strictly genetics context, but do discuss testing with patients. So people like oncologists would have fallen into that other category. So 73% of our people were from genetics contexts, and then we had quite a good number of people who were in different contexts as well. 86% of the people who filled in the survey were aware of the moratorium, which was good news, but less than half of them had attended any training. And I think there wasn't a lot going on, like we spoke about before, to make sure that this information got out into the general community, but even into health professional spaces. And although almost 70% believed that they had enough information about this to advise patients as necessary, only 16% of them answered all of the knowledge questions correctly. And these weren't really tricky questions, they were questions that were very basic and could have been found on the fact sheet, and so we're a bit concerned. There were still quite a few professionals who believed that health insurance, for example, was not protected, and so they were telling patients that health insurance was also something that they might receive discrimination for in Australia. We found, not unsurprisingly, that genetic health professionals' awareness and knowledge were far better than non-genetics professionals. So when you moved it into the group that were from genetics clinics, their knowledge was certainly better. It wasn't amazing still, but it was certainly better. And when you moved it into the non-genetics professionals, that knowledge really dropped and was almost non-existent. We did see some reported decrease in patients delaying or declining testing, so that's not direct information, but we asked health professionals whether they saw patients delaying or declining less after the moratorium was put into place, and there was a slight reported decrease in this. But we found that almost half of the health professionals still disagreed that patients were more willing to have testing post-moratorium. So they were still reporting that a lot of people were either deciding not to have a test or they were delaying testing, going away, maybe not coming back because they wanted to think about their insurance before they had testing. We also found that although a lot of people felt that the moratorium resolved some concerns that they had about discrimination, so they saw that it was a good step and a positive step in the right direction, most of them still had serious concerns with the protection that it offered and with how their patients and research participants were feeling. The primary concerns that we saw come up again and again were those same things that I mentioned earlier: self-regulation, the financial limits being too low to cover a lot of people's needs, and also that temporary nature and lack of ability to reassure. I have a genetic counselling student who also has done a qualitative survey where she interviewed some of these people to get a more in-depth understanding of their views. And this is just the demographics of that. There are 23 participants who were interviewed. This is almost published, but it's not quite out yet. And we found, again, it was very clear that those same three themes were emerging. We saw some benefits with alleviating patient concerns to a certain extent, but again, issues around self-regulation, financial limits, and that uncertainty. We also asked health professionals how they felt about regulation in Australia, whether they felt that more was needed, and we found overwhelmingly that they said yes, more government involvement is needed. We don't trust insurers, patients don't trust insurers, we're worried about whether they will do what they are supposed to do, and the majority said that they felt that legislation was needed in Australia to address this. So this is just a little summary of how health professionals feel about the moratorium. Generally, there are some benefits, but there are still some concerns, and the government needs to step in and be involved. We've also done some research with consumers, and we've split that into patients and the general population. And so our patients we described as genetic testers, pre-testers and decliners. It's very difficult to get information about people who either have gone away and haven't decided to have a test yet, or people who don't want to have testing. And so in the design of our survey, we tried to get at people who were either still thinking about or had decided not to have a genetic test. We did an online survey, and the criteria was that Australians who've had or are eligible for a genetic test for a gene change that increases their chance of developing disease would be eligible. Now, we included people, because that's a bit vague, if they'd taken or been offered a test, or if their first-degree relative had taken such a test. And so under Australian criteria, we said that they would be eligible because they'd had a first-degree relative who'd had one of these tests. We had 367 patients fill in this survey, and most of them had had genetic tests themselves, so there were a few whose family had had them. 30% of them were after the time when the moratorium came into effect, and 75% of them had had a positive test, a smaller degree hadn't had testing yet, and then some of them were negative. We found a really good range of conditions. In the past, we focused really just on cancer predisposition, but we partnered with a number of different groups and were able to get some good responses from people who had mitochondrial disease, hemochromatosis, FH, cardiovascular disease, and got some really good responses across the board. We found that many of them didn't know whether life insurance companies are legally allowed to use genetic test results or not. Keep in mind that most of these people are people who've had testing in a clinical context, should have been told about this, but we're still seeing that awareness isn't great. 84% of them had never heard of the moratorium, which has now been in place for a few years, but the majority of them said that life insurance companies shouldn't legally be able to use this information in underwriting. And you can see there that even though there was a minority who said no or unsure, that there was a lot of them said they weren't sure, and there was a very small amount who actually said that they thought that should be allowed. So we had about 20 people who either were decliners or pre-testers, but 14 of them answered our questions about why they made that decision or what factors influenced the decision that they had made or were making. We asked about a number of different things, but we asked them as well about whether the effect of life insurance concerns had an impact on that decision. And 50% of them said that life insurance concerns had either a moderate or significant effect on their decision-making around delaying or not having their testing. Again, a large majority agreed that the Australian government should introduce legislation on this issue. We also found, we asked people whether they had had trouble accessing life insurance, and 44% of them had never tried to apply for life insurance before, but of the remainder, a large number reported that they had had some difficulty obtaining insurance. So either having cover denied, or in Australia it's very common for people to see a financial advisor or a broker, and many of them said they hadn't been denied, but their advisor had told them, you won't be able to get insurance, or I won't be able to arrange insurance before you because of your genetic test. We've also got some genetic data that we're just starting to analyse, so it's not part of this talk, but we've collected it directly from the insurance industry, and it's showing, even on their own self-reported data, the number of times that they are declining insurance on the basis of genetics. So it's certainly something that is happening and is accepted as something that happens every day in Australia. We also partnered with the Australian Survey of Social Attitudes in Australia to do a survey of the general public around their attitudes on this issue. We thought that might be a bit different to people who'd actually been through genetic testing in the clinic. And they select citizens quarterly from the electoral roll and post them out randomly, and so these findings are drawn from responses that were sent out across the last year. They have a focus each year, and we were just lucky that the focus was health last year, and so it was a really good topic to ask about. We've had about 1,000 responses come in. Some of them are very new, so this is early data and not published, but it was even less people amongst this cohort knew that it was legal for life insurance companies to use genetic test results. Only 7% of the general public thought that this was something that should be legal. Only 3% had heard of the moratorium. I'm actually surprised that 3% had. In the general public, this is something that really most people haven't even heard about or don't even know that policy is required. We found that 78% agreed or strongly agreed that the government should introduce legislation about this issue. We also asked some questions about a population screening program. So at Monash, we're about to launch a screening program next month where we're testing 10,000 young adults for tier 1 conditions, so breast and ovarian cancer, Lynch syndrome and FH. And we're doing that through a study to basically pilot a population screening genomic program. But we asked people whether they would be interested in having that kind of screening if it was paid for by the government, etc. And we asked them about a number of things that might increase or decrease their likelihood to participate in this kind of screening. And in that context, 86% that this potential for life insurers to use their genetic test results may or definitely would decrease their likelihood of participating. We're also doing some work with researchers. Some colleagues from the University of Queensland did an online survey which was open to researchers working on genetics projects that had the potential to return results. And this is, again, very early data, but a majority said that the use of research results in insurance underwriting was a potential barrier to recruitment in their studies. And a number of them said that they thought Australian government should introduce legislation to regulate. This was a lower number than some of our other surveys, and so it will be interesting to see in some of our qualitative data why that is. We're doing some interviews as well, and we've done about 20 interviews so far. I think we're almost finished with that. And our initial analysis shows that there is some impact on research participation being reported as well, but that there are some real knowledge barriers to researchers understanding this issue or knowing about the moratorium, being able to tell participants what their implications might be. And finally, I know I'm almost out of time, we're doing some research with the financial services industry and doing some qualitative interviews with financial advisors. My colleagues at the University of Melbourne are doing this. It's been very difficult to recruit these people, and so we've only done 9 interviews so far. Hopefully we'll be able to find some more. But we are seeing some key findings coming through with industry being or the advisors being very critical on the industry in terms of inadvertent disclosure and how they're using genetic test results even when people shouldn't have to disclose them. And the importance of coaching clients, not to tell them to be fraudulent, but really the need for advisors to understand how this works and the lack of understanding so that they can then tell participants what they need to do. There was really an ambivalence around limits as well. Some of them said, in fact, many of them said, I never see anyone who needs less than $500,000 of cover. So again, they said for people who are seeing a financial advisor, the moratorium doesn't help them in any way. If they're coming to me, they need far more cover than that, and so it isn't protecting any of my clients. They also mentioned the lack of recourse. So if there was a denial or something like that, there was really nowhere for them or for the applicant to go to appeal that or to get a different decision. So like I said, at the end of the project, we'll be producing a stakeholder report which should come out mid-next year. Unfortunately, we don't have any funding for follow-up, and so at the moment we are, I guess, looking for ways in which we can then move into a government engagement phase. We see, especially in Australia, that when policy recommendations come out, they're often shelved and nothing else happens unless there's real effort put into engaging government and making sure that policy is kept on the top of the agenda. These are my research team members and different partners. We have a really strong network of partners and a lot of groups who are really interested and concerned about this who've supported us along the way. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks so much. Colleagues, we have about 11 minutes before noon. So by all means, if you have any questions or comments for Jane, please do come up to the microphone. Yes, please, in the back, and please introduce yourself before your question or comment.
Good morning, Dr. Tiller. My name's Jack Riley. I'm visiting from Canada at London Health Sciences Centre in London, Ontario. As you might guess from my origins coming from Canada, I was wondering if I could ask you a couple of questions comparing the genetic discrimination bills that we've introduced in Canada. Are there any characteristics that this bill has that you'd like to see implemented in Australia? I know you did a lot of comparisons to the UK, but I'm interested to see if you have any information that I might be able to bring home.
Yeah, so obviously we've spoken a lot with Jan and the group about the Canadian bill, and one of the things I didn't mention was that the parliamentary inquiry recommended that the moratorium be put into place, but that the government keep a watching brief and implement legislation if it wasn't successful, and they said that it should be in the form of the Canadian legislation. Now, they might have said that because that's what we told them, but certainly there was meant to be that idea that this wasn't finished with, and that's part of why we sought funding, because the government wasn't responding and we wanted to be able to put recommendations to government. I think the Canadian bill is great. There's obviously there are some flaws or some things that we might want to look at, and some of these omics questions and the developing technology and the difficulty in keeping up with that with an inflexible law are something that needs to be looked at, and we talk about that at the GDO, ways of introducing schedules or ways that we can change things. But certainly the ability to get a complete prohibition through in a legislative sense is, I think, quite a feat. And despite the limitations, if we could do that in Australia, I'd be extremely happy. I know different people in Canada have different views, but to get to the point of being able to have that legislation, I think, is really, really good. If we could have something that was flexible and could be updated, I think that would be great. If we could incorporate some different aspects of different omics into it, I think it would be great. But it's far better than our situation, and I'd be happy if I was standing here with that news to give.
I wish you all your best luck. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Jack.
Thank you very much. I see Ainsley coming up. Maybe I'll take chair's prerogative while Ainsley's coming up to the microphone. Sort of picking up on that last question, maybe thinking about the European context, or perhaps just application of what you've learned from Australia and applying it internationally to other jurisdictions. What sort of lessons do you think could be applied to the European context from what Australia has done recently? A lot of questions came to mind listening to your tracing of the history, including some of the challenges between 2002 and 2015, where there were so many great recommendations and reports, but nothing concrete from government or others in power. And government hasn't responded yet to the call for a ban on insurers using test results. So it raises a lot of questions about, is law the answer? Is law the best outcome? Thinking that so many people want more law, but as we know, perhaps as lawyers, law is not always the answer. And I really liked how you distinguish between sort of short-term policy moratoria, recognizing the limitations, however, of self-regulation with no enforcement mechanisms, versus something longer term, like a law with state-backed monitoring and enforcement, recognizing, however, the challenges of getting law. So, and maybe I can throw in one more wrinkle before.
It's a complicated question.
It's a complicated question. I know lawyers are terrible for that. To my knowledge, there isn't a human rights law per se in Australia either. Please correct me if I'm wrong. You have discrimination legislation, but there isn't a European Convention on Human Rights in Australia. So does that also throw another sort of wrinkle into all of this thinking about where Australia might go when there isn't a human rights framework like we have in Europe to sort of set the backdrop for concerns of discrimination? Now I bring my question to a close. Thank you, Jay.
I'll try and address all of that the best I can. I think we have some human rights instruments in different states in Australia, but we don't have sort of a federal human rights, nothing like the European Convention, certainly. And I think we're a bit behind, especially in looking at things like genetic privacy and some of those things. And it's a shame because, like I said, 2001, we were really proactive in looking at that in Australia and putting out that big report, and it was seen as something that was done very proactively. And then it really languished in Australia. I think many years ago there was a genetic discrimination or privacy bill put up by a Green senator, which didn't go anywhere. And since then, it really has dropped off, and I think people and politicians especially have just accepted the way things are. They've accepted the use by insurance industry. They've accepted that has to be how it is. And I think, there's now some resurgence, but Europe has addressed it much more proactively. And while different European countries might have difficulty in how to implement that, what local regulation they might need, flexibility in regulation, and they're things that I think European countries are working out, and many of them have different ways of doing that. I think not letting it languish is really important. I think we really let it languish in Australia, and we really got to the point where I speak at international conferences and people are shocked that this is still a problem, that this is still something that is seen as okay by the government, that it's accepted by society. And they say, oh, like, we didn't even know that that still happened anywhere in the world. And every time that happens, I say, I wish I could take you and put you in front of the Australian Parliament and say, many people across the rest of the world in Europe are shocked that we even allow this anymore. This isn't, we're behind now, we're not in front.
We have time for
Ainsley.
one last question, and I'm delighted. Ainsley, please. Yes, please.
My question was very, very similar to yours, Ted, so I'll ask a different one. Ainsley Newsom from University of Sydney. And, you know, that was a really comprehensive presentation, thank you. So I'm going to ask you a provocative question, just deliberately. And it's, you know, I think, yes, there's a lot of things that could be fixed. And for what it's worth, I don't think Australia's attitude to genetic privacy is necessarily that problematic. I think our regulatory regime is quite innovative and very flexible. But what is the nature of the problem here that we are trying to solve? Because a lot of these insurance products in Australia are ones that high-income earners have, or are things that aren't absolutely necessary to human flourishing. You know, our health insurance is community risk rated, so this type of information is less relevant, not completely irrelevant. A lot of our superannuation or pension products in Australia have inbuilt total permanent disability insurance and inbuilt income protection and life insurance as well. And so, you know, like I said, I'm being deliberately provocative. Is this just a problem for rich people?
It's not, but yes. I know you're being deliberately provocative because people often say this. They say, well, who needs life insurance? The fact is that, as I mentioned, and Ainsley will be well aware of this, but in Australia, our cost of living is very high and it's increasing, and certainly over COVID it has become much higher. Our house prices and our mortgages, which is generally the reason why most people need to have life insurance, is to cover off on their debts if they do die or get into a significant accident. And the level of cover that's required for the average person to have those debts appropriately covered is really where life insurance fits in. And it's really something that people need to have to not be in a very unfortunate position. We do have social security in Australia, and it is quite good for people in certain situations, but someone who has a wife and young children and an extremely high mortgage, and you don't have to be rich or have a fancy house in Australia to have an extremely high mortgage. You just might have a regular small house in the suburbs that fits your two children in it. And so in order to be adequately protected, people really do need to have life insurance. There's an underinsurance report that's put out each year in Australia, and every year Australia is chronically underinsured, and it is a real problem that puts people in significant financial stress when issues do happen. And so while life insurance might be seen to be something that is only for rich people, it really isn't, and the way our society is structured is that people who are in a regular income bracket really need to have it to be in a protected financial position. And because of that, many people are aware of it, and we see the deterrence. So from a financial point of view, financial advisors see it as an insurance problem. Do people have enough insurance? From a clinical and public health perspective, we see it as affecting people's participation and willingness to be involved in research. It really affects the potential of genomic medicine to increase. Like I said, we're about to launch DNA Screen, where we're testing 10,000 people who are between 18 and 40 who are, they don't have to be healthy, but many of them will be healthy people. It's not done in a clinical context. And we have to tell them in our recruitment materials, this might affect your insurance. And people who are 22 might not have insurance yet, but they will want it when they're in their 30s and earning a reasonable wage and taking out a mortgage. And so they will say, ooh, I don't know, like I'm not sick, I might want this preventative information, it might save my life, but ooh, I don't know because they've just told me about insurance and that makes me worried, and maybe I'll put that off and maybe I won't do it. And that's where we see the clinical and the research and the genomic medicine impacts.
Thank you very much, Ainsley. Colleagues, I see we're exactly at 12 o'clock, so thank you very much to our two presenters, Jane Tiller and Jan Joly, again for fantastic presentations. Can I give them a round of applause again? Could I also thank the the staff in the room for helping organize these things. Really, you know, I don't think we thank colleagues enough for helping us with the audiovisual and everything else, so thank you as well. Yes, please, thank you. Makes it flawless for those who sit here. Colleagues, there is the poster viewing between now and 2 p.m. in the exhibition hall, so please do go visit the posters. And of course, there is the opening plenary at 2:30 p.m. in room A, which is on level 2. And please enjoy your lunch and the nice sunny weather outside.